Main concepts that are important when we are talking about the digital is privacy on one side, and privacy is a big deal. Everybody is talking about privacy at the moment. There is obviously like the companies that are not very interested in privacy because it means less business for them, and there is the citizens that are a bit worried about privacy, but at the same time are sharing all the information freely on the internet. So it's an interesting topic, and we'll just explore it through the lens of neoliberalism. And we'll use for the first time Foucault, who was an important author for neoliberalism. And we'll use also another one, which is Evgeny Morozov. And Jasmine, through our presentation, we'll talk a little bit more about what is the work of Evgeny Morozov, but I just want to say that it's two very important philosophers when you talk about philosophy. We will have Tim's presentation on privacy and how collective groups are thinking about privacy. Am I correct?
Something like that, yeah.
All right. That would be a little bit around that. And then we try to explain a little bit where the concept of neoliberalism comes from. So we get back to what is liberalism, then what is neoliberalism, and then what is digital neoliberalism. All right? So I just want to start with the panopticon, which is linked to privacy, and which is a concept in philosophy that has a long history. Does anyone here have any idea where the panopticon comes from?
I'll mention it in my presentation later, but...
Okay. You can start by just introducing the roots of the concept if you want.
Foucault wrote about it in Discipline and Punishment, I think, but he talks about how panopticon is a structure of, it's like a way of building a jail cell so that if you're a prisoner, you can't hear anybody, you can't see anybody, but there's like a tower in the middle of the room where there are guards inside. So it creates the feeling of like, I'm always, like as a prisoner, you're always being watched, you don't have the freedom to do what you want. It's also kind of makes you go crazy because you don't hear anybody, you don't see anybody, and the watchtower is actually shaded, so you never know if anyone's in there. But it's supposed to create a feeling of like you're always being watched, even though you don't know someone's actually watching you.
Mm-hmm. Right. So we see how this panopticon concept that was first explored by Jeremy Bentham in the 17th century, and that was re-exploited by Foucault in 1975 in Surveil and Punishment, was also something that we can use today to talk about surveillance in our society. So we'll watch first 10 minutes of a documentary that is called Panopticon. It's a Dutch documentary, and I was talking this morning with someone that is living in my co-op who is actually Dutch, and she told me that the Netherlands society is a society that is very advanced in terms of digital. They have a lot of digital software democracy tools that we have explored before. They are not as advanced as Estonia, but they are very well advanced, and so they have also started a pretty good panopticon society. So I just want to show you the beginning of this documentary.
Is dat overal zo? Dit is een face recognition camera. Hij scant mij nu. Via de nieuwste gezichtsherkenningstechnieken checkt hij per direct een database met ongewenste reizigers om eventueel alarm te slaan. Als passagier heb je niet door dat je gescand wordt.
Er hangt dus niet op de deur een bordje gezichtsherkenning.
Dus mensen worden gewoon even gefilmd en gescand, maar ze hebben eigenlijk niet in de gaten dat het gebeurt.
Nee. Sowieso. Het valt de mensen gewoon niet op. Het is een puur automaat.
Mijn gezichtsscan wordt bewaard in de database van de vervoerder en na een week vernietigd.
Is het niet raar eigenlijk om iedereen die binnenkomt eigenlijk een beetje stiekem te filmen?
Hoe moet je alles controleren?
Nou, op de oude manier gewoon. Meneer, hoi, laat even de dingen zien.
Onlangs was er onenigheid in de Rotterdamse tram. Een journalist zag hoe de conducteur dit meldde aan de centrale. Het hele gesprek bleek opgenomen en als bewijs bewaard. Afluisteren en gezichtsherkenning. Welkom in de Rotterdamse tram. Maar maakt dit niet een te grote inbreuk op mijn privacy? De VN-wet uit 1966 op de privacy zegt: Niemand mag worden onderworpen aan willekeurige of onwettige inmenging in zijn privéleven, zijn gezinsleven, zijn huis en zijn briefwisseling. Noch aan onwettige aantasting van zijn eer en goede naam. Een ieder heeft recht op bescherming door de wet tegen zodanige inmenging of aantasting. Zeg eens eerlijk, vraag jij je wel eens af hoe 6 minuten eruit zien?
So there were many interesting elements in this documentary, I think. When you go on the side of what is privacy, so what is the definition of privacy that we want to accept for our society, but there are also different steps of the pharmacon. Just because it's our last class and I want to make sure that you get out of this class with the pharmacon and deep into your mind, what are the signs here of the symptomatology of the digital in our society? Or what are the signs of how the digital has changed the way that we perceive privacy? Which is the first step of the pharmacon, the symptomatology.
You mean cameras and phones and stuff?
Yeah, like the way that we understood privacy has a long history. I'm sure that Matthew can jump in now and give us more detail on what is the history of privacy, but privacy is a concept that has changed drastically over the time, and it's not as always been what it is nowadays, but it's again changing for in a different direction. So what was privacy before? Let's say from the 16th century to the 20th century, how did we understood privacy? What did it mean, privacy, for us? When we say like we were in a private environment. But it's really simple. What did it mean?
Not being under surveillance.
Not even surveillance. I wouldn't start by saying surveillance, but
Just not being.
You weren't even around other people, much less being watched. You couldn't even see other people, or weren't even close to them.
So it meant that you had a space in your life where nobody was watching, or at least that's what you saw. And what has changed since digital life has arrived to our society?
It's opened up new markets.
It's what?
It's opened up new markets which capitalize on big data analytics.
It's impressive.
That's true. When you compare the space for private life before and the space for private life nowadays, what is the change happening in the world? Just a quick notice, Matthew is not filming you directly, it's for his own blog and for the content of our class. If someone doesn't want to appear in the video, please let me know because we can change the...
Don't want to hear.
I don't want.
You don't? Cool.
That's fine. That's okay. I'll face this way.
So what is the proportion of privacy that has changed?
Well, what has changed is the pervasiveness of digital and electronic devices. So potentially, even if you are alone, there's some type of device that has a camera or some kind of logging or audio, that's always with you.
So just for the first step of the pharmacon, the symptomatology, the way that privacy is lived, is experienced nowadays has changed. And then we can talk about the diagnostic of the privacy, which is so what is the essence, what is the ontology of privacy nowadays, and then we can talk about the therapy of the privacy, like how can we understand privacy in the digital age, but that's other questions. So I wanted just to point out that we are here mostly on the poisonous aspect of privacy, but again, there is always two sides about the pharmacon, and there is no reason why we think about privacy just in a surveillance way. Privacy could be something that is also empowering for individuals, but we have to think it in the right frame for society.
So I can start that in. So, little introduction. My name is Matthew Schutte. I used to go to Berkeley. I went to law school here about
graduated 8 years ago. And I basically would describe myself as a political theorist. Like, I do a lot of things, but at the core, I'm a political theorist. So that's sort of like philosophy applied to government, right? And a lot of what I ended up focusing on, and have focused on for the last 10 years, was privacy and transparency, and how we can build digital tools that help our society function better, to thrive, blah, 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 but how we balance those things. And so I had a series of epiphanies during law school, like 4 of them, but the second one that's relevant here is the one that's relevant here, and that was sort of a realize that we didn't have a general theory of privacy. As a society, we don't really have a consensus about what privacy is and why it's important. We know that it's important at some level. Like, in our gut, we know it's important. But in most other areas of law, there was a pretty widely agreed upon consensus about, like, why we do something, and a framework about how the world works. So I kind of want to open it up to you guys. And he already asked this, but I'm going to kind of try to create a little bit more space and room for it. Like, what does privacy do for us? Like, what are the benefits of privacy? If we take like a utilitarian perspective on this, like utility, how does privacy work? And what is it that it provides to a society? And I'll frame this a little bit more narrowly. If you had 2 communities and they were competing with one another, and one had privacy that worked well, and one didn't, why would the one with privacy that worked well win? Well, how is it that they would outcompete a community that has dysfunctional privacy?
Was crime like the obvious first? Isn't that what they say, that the invasion is all for anyways, and privacy is to prevent crime?
So that's their rationale for preventing privacy, but what is it that privacy does for you? Like, what, if that's a harm, why is that a problem?
I guess it's some form of like personal identity. I mean, there's some information that you want to keep away from other people because you may believe it's something that may, like, you just don't want to share with other people, I guess, and that thing or things may define who you are.
Why wouldn't you want to share them with other people? Somebody else, yeah.
I mean, I was thinking about privacy like from a utilitarian standpoint. I see it as a way for communities to organize and protest a governing body if the governing body decides to be like imperialistic or just, you know.
So there's a dissent, the ability to. Well, what's the problem? Like, if I wanted to do that, couldn't I do that even if there's no privacy?
No, because I feel like if the governing body has information about you, then they are more likely to prevent you from dissenting.
Like, it could literally show up and stop you before you even get there. Okay.
I think the problem is that Americans don't trust the data that's being collected by the government to be solely used for anti-terrorist or anti-crime purposes. On top of the Snowden revelations, it came out that conservatives were being targeted by the IRS. That's a total abuse of authority. You can't use someone's personal data that you mine illegally to then target them based on their political views. And these examples are just compounded over and over again. It's gotten to the point where cybersecurity companies and any company that has to do with security have these outrageous valuations because everybody wants to get in on it. No one wants to give the government their information. If the government had any credibility left, people might be willing to do so, but they've really blown their opportunity to establish a trustful relationship with the public.
What does privacy look like? Oh, go ahead.
I just want to say one thing. That's I'm a parent and I have a disabled son, and I want to raise him the way I want to raise him, and I don't necessarily want that being monitored, and especially when I give him therapy and stuff. He's autistic. I don't agree always with what the government thinks that we should give those kids therapy, so I was thinking that's what would be good about having my privacy. That's very important to me to protect.
Okay. So you may not agree with the general consensus social norms with regard to what treatments, etc.
Yeah, and if they're monitoring me, well, are they going to stop me, or just stay out of it? That's what I feel.
deals with relationships between individuals and the government. What if we lived in a context where there was no government? Just what is privacy when we think about not between governments, but between individuals or between individuals and a company? Let's leave a company out of it because a company can be kind of like a government and it's a large organization. So between you and me, what's privacy again?
I would say it's the privacy is rooted in the idea that it's your decision to share or not to share what you want and not want to share. So, and I feel like that's been taken away more and more because it's not so much it's and it's always framed in that legal context where you say when people don't want to share things, they do bad things. So you want to prevent malfunctioning of society by basically exposing all behavior of all people because you think then people would behave in a good way. But people might just do their thing for a while and then decide to share something or to just do it for themselves, not harming anyone, but just they would just feel prevented from, just like the prisoners. The prisoners might not just feel prevented from trying to escape, but also from trying to do normal things because they're always watched. So that's, I guess, this ability to decide whether you want to share or not.
Do you have a comment?
Yes, but I wasn't going to say it. Well, I think that it builds respect when you, if you have something that you want to keep private, and even between friends, and you can tell somebody wants to keep something private, it builds your level of respect between each other, and in a governmental sense, that would improve respect of the government as well.
Okay, so there's something that you brought up there that may have been present, but was kind of the way you had painted this, and I totally agree with what you said, Lucas. Yeah.
Yeah.
The way that you had painted this, you talked about sort of a binary share not share structure, and you had touched on something a little bit different, which is I want to share with these people. And I don't want that information to go necessarily beyond those people. Well, why would they not tell somebody else? How would the information stop there? How do you know? Or how do you have faith? Like, what leads you to believe that they're not going to go and share that information elsewhere?
I mean, it's like it's all based on like faith and how well you know the person. Like if you didn't trust the person in the first place, why would you be telling him or her like certain delicate information about yourself? I mean, like
so let's say you do trust them.
I mean, yeah, and if they tell someone, then like really, what can you do? Because in that moment, you made that decision that you did trust them.
What would you do? Let's say you had told me a secret, and I went and told somebody I wasn't supposed to tell that secret to. How would you interact with me the next time?
Well, I just wouldn't tell you anything anymore.
Yeah.
Right. So what's the threat for me? What is the coercive power that keeps me behaving the way that we had in, maybe not written down, but an informal agreement about how to behave?
I guess like the state of our relationship before you like went and told my secrets to other people, like the continuance of our relationship. I guess that's like the main motivator.
Yeah.
So you don't want to ruin it.
So the threat is a loss of access.
Yeah.
Well, what about, and how does reputation, so that was me literally losing access to him. He's no longer willing to share ideas with me directly.
Yeah.
How does reputation differ from that a little bit?
You might also lose access to other people, but only if they know. That's the point. So if either other people see you telling that secret or talk to him and he tells them.
Yeah, so maybe he tells other people, like, Matt's a blabbermouth.
Yeah.
Right? Like, don't trust him with your secrets. He's a gossip. And I suddenly start to lose access to sensitive information more broadly. Do we want him to exercise perfect control over in ways that eliminate my ability to be able to violate his expectation? Do we want that? She's shaking her head no. Why not?
Yeah.
Well, that would take out your own free will, I guess. If he had power to keep you from telling the secret, then you would feel obligated instead of a willing participant of the secret.
Sure.
Yeah, in terms of society, that would lead to a difficult situation, because assuming that you, having the secret is the organization that organizes the society, let's say the government, and you are a citizen, if there is a mistrust between citizens and government, we start to be in a society that won't operate in a very smooth way.
That point sort of elevates something that was a major epiphany for me. The first epiphany that I had during law school was culture trumps law. Words, laws, written down words, do not have inherent meaning. They don't dictate how they will be interpreted. They don't dictate how they will be acted upon. And so in order for those words to actually take action within the community, individuals, humans get involved and they behave in certain ways. Maybe shaped by their interpretation of those words, but they behave. The police are enforcing that law in a specific way. The judge is slapping the cop on the wrist for only arresting black kids and never, and enforcing the wrong way in the way that a judge thinks is wrong. The community steps in and riots in the streets because they feel like the laws are being applied unfairly, or it was a bad law in the first place. Right? But at the end of the day, what you get on the ground is only what people are willing to stand up and fight for, what they are willing to demand of themselves, what they are willing to demand of others. I lived in Indonesia, I lived in Korea, I lived in Thailand. Have any of you ever lived in a country where there is corruption?
We're living in one right now.
We're living in one right now, great, right? Have you lived in a country where you bribe cops on the street in broad daylight and nobody thinks anything of it? How many of you been visited, lived in? Okay. Many of those countries have laws against corruption. It's written down. That's illegal. They have laws that are basically the same laws as we have here, but they have very different outcomes. Why?
Because of the culture?
Yeah, right? There's a different cultural expectation. Here, that's a shameful thing. That's taboo. To accept a bribe, to offer a bribe. In that community, they might go, well, everybody knows the government doesn't pay them nearly enough to live on. They've got to supplement their salary some way. This is how you do it. It's part of the expected behavior. So, governments do play a role. It's an institution that we use to help sculpt and influence how we should behave. But it's not the only one, right? There are norms right now in this room that we haven't written down, but none of you are interrupting me, right? Why? It's an informal social norm. What would happen if you did just constantly be interrupting and it didn't have anything to do with this class? You're like showing cat videos, right? You're like, oh, check Grumpy Cat, new Grumpy Cat, right? This one's way better than the last one. Be like, seriously, Lucas, on the Grumpy, can somebody take his phone away? So, from my perspective, privacy really deals with control, and it deals with exclusion. One of the big, slap your forehead moments for me in law school is when they told me that property wasn't about the ability to use something, it was about the ability to keep other people from using it. Right? And Carlos had touched earlier on, how did we do privacy way back when, and the basic gist of it is private property. Right? You closed the door, and we had a discussion in here, and that kept anybody else from seeing us. It wasn't recorded, it wasn't indexed, it wasn't searchable, right? And the social norms kept things quiet. Slavery, from my perspective, is a privacy issue. How so?
Because it's an invasion of one's personal life, his ability to make choices, decisions,
to control what they do with their body, right? We don't think about privacy in that regard a lot today because that's something we haven't dealt with in a long time, and we don't yet have the technology to use a remote control to make Colas like to work him like a puppet, right? But if we did, we would go, whoa, that is not cool, right? He's like, I don't want to do this, you know. We really are aware of privacy in terms of sexual violations, right? Not just not making him use his body, but allowing somebody else to interact with his body in specific ways, or her body in specific ways. So that's sexual intimacy. Also, any other forms of intimacy, sharing real deep, intimate secrets. We recognize that privacy touches there. In terms of information privacy, which gets into the digital, my belief is privacy really deals with control over the breadth of distribution of information. It deals with an expectation of how far this is going to go. This is nobody else can see me. This is just us talking. This is only members of this group. This is public, right? It deals with an expectation of it and the alignment between that expectation and actual outcomes. For me, well-functioning private spheres are spheres within which there is good alignment between our expectations and actual outcomes. It doesn't mean perfect alignment, right? Because he might have expected me to not say something, but I decided to anyway, and that may end up being really good, right? All issues of dissent and the dominant norms maybe not being the right ones. When you have well-functioning private spheres, you have safe spaces, spaces that people trust, that they believe they can do something here and nobody's going to know about it. And that safety allows us to be vulnerable. It allows us to take risks. It allows us to try new things, to experiment, to share things with others, to collaborate, to communicate, to invest incredible amounts of effort into building up a project because we aren't worried that somebody is monitoring, a competitor is monitoring every step of the way and they're just going to at the last second go, cool, copy, paste, and they've got all the energy and capital to take that thing the rest of the way because we're spent from the effort. No. Private spheres give us a safe space within which we can do all of this. Coming back to the utilitarian point, my belief is that communities that have well-functioning private spheres have spaces within which people can be vulnerable, can experiment, can collaborate, and those communities end up with a much richer and more diverse set of ideas and ways of living being practiced within that community. And when there's a new change, a new threat, a new opportunity, some shift in the environment, that community, it much more readily adapts and capitalizes on that opportunity or threat. So what is the utilitarian benefit of privacy? Resilience. Right? The community that doesn't have privacy has no resilience. When you look at totalitarian regimes, nobody previously in history has been able to physically work the body of every individual within their community. So totalitarianism has always relied upon control of information. It wasn't that they forced the information down people's throats. It's that they removed the ability for people to rely and have faith in the sanctity of the private spheres that they were interacting in. They never knew that they could tell a secret to a neighbor and that secret wouldn't get to the government. Because they didn't know if the neighbor would rat them out, the neighbor would then get tortured and be forced to rat them out, or somebody else was listening in. So totalitarian regimes have always had to do with information and with the violation of privacy. And as a result, they tend to lose. Right? On the long arc of history, those communities don't work out so well. So a lot of my work has been focused on how do you do that? Right? Like, how do you build digital systems that enable us to get reputation benefits, that enable us to coordinate at scale? You guys maybe have touched on all of this in the past, but what's the value of transparency? What's the value of reputation? Right? It's the thing we touched on a little bit earlier. I might get cut off. I might lose access. So my work is focused on how do you build information architectures that enable a global society to self-regulate on the basis of reputation and informal social norms, despite the fact that we are never going to agree about what those norms should be, who to trust, or even what something is. Right? And, yeah.
So in that light, Matthew, I envision that there is two kind of direction. The first one is either individuals are aware enough of that privacy issue and they start to use the tools that they can use. For example, we have talked in this class about encryption, PGP technology, the Bitcoin technology, the Tor browser. So this is the first side of it. It's like everybody in the society finally understands that privacy is very important.
Thank you, Snowden.
Thank you, Snowden.
Yeah.
And I would point
Change the
out,
conversation.
yeah, that on the other side you have Eric Schmidt, the CEO of Google, that just say that privacy has no future. So there is like that two different understanding of privacy. But if we go for like, oh, we need privacy, so we should use that tool. That's the first direction. And then there is also the second direction, which is transparency, which is that we should monitor our government so that we know where all this data go. How do you think the architecture of information should in which direction should go? Should be like a combination of these two? How do you picture?
Sure. So, I'll take a step back first. We touched on one tool a minute ago for influencing the behavior of others, and that was access, right? Controlling access. So the threat of a loss of access is how reputation ends up getting people behaving quote unquote good. What's the other coercive tool that humans have at their disposal for forcing other people to behave well?
Threats.
Threats? What kind of threats? Because I'm not going to talk to you anymore could be a threat.
Yeah, they can be
Violent.
Violent threats, okay. Violence sound like a good word to use?
Yeah,
Yeah,
but violence also can embody a lot of things, including like, for example, economical violence or gender violence or that kind of...
Tell me about economical violence.
Like, so for example, economical violence is a way that some people have less access to some economical resources.
So I'm going to distinguish that from violence that acts on the body.
Okay.
I'm going to sweep that under access, right? So control of access versus violence. And the reason I'm going to distinguish those two things is because they operate in different ways. So let's take violence to start off. Actually, no, we'll take access to start off. So let's say I'm talking blah blah blah. I do something, and what's your name?
Opal.
Opal. So Opal decides I'm a douche. That douche equals something, right? She's like, I don't want to do anything with that guy ever again. Never want to talk to him. I'm cut off from her. The rest of you might think I'm fine. What is the result? If we live in a community, I still have an ability to survive. I can coordinate, I can collaborate, I can work with the rest of you. I'm now cut off from Opal. And she, having control over her own life, is able to say, I don't want to interact with him anymore. What if she wasn't using access? What if she wasn't just denying access to her? What if she was using violence? So, if Opal, instead of deciding, like, I don't want to talk to him anymore, puts me in jail, or kills me, how does that differ from the first?
Well, you lost access to everybody, not just her.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's pretty powerful.
Violence. It's a much more blunt object, right? So violence is binary.
Yeah.
Violence, when it acts on the body, either imprisonment or decapitation or whatever, right? Violence is an all or nothing game. It is so powerful, in fact, that our reliance on that tool as the primary coercive mechanism to do governance is why we've found it so important to make sure that that governmental power gets used wisely, right? Gets used for the benefit of the community, etc. And we end up having institutions of democracy and freedom of speech, and all of those things are really all about, hey, that power, that violent power, that monopoly of violence is so powerful that it can get abused really easily. And so we want to make sure we have lots of checks to ensure that that's only getting used in certain situations in certain ways. But in getting pretty good at that, we as a society have shifted primarily to thinking about governance through that lens alone. Right? Humans have always used violence and access control throughout all of their history, right? You get shunned from the community, or they hack you up with a machete. I mean, and this ain't going to change. It's not going to change, and that's okay. I think that's okay. My belief is that the regulatory structure that humans literally evolved to work with was one of access control and reputation. Evolutionary changes that happen in our brains, things like the ability to recognize faces better than other shapes. Like the group that did that was able to keep track of bad actors in their community much better. And as a result, that community was able to function at larger sizes. How many of you have heard of Dunbar's number? What is Dunbar's number?
140?
150-ish, somewhere in there, right? What does it mean?
It's theoretically the amount of people that you can technically be friends with or keep constant contact with, I guess.
Close to that. I got a lot more friends than that, right? But really what it is the size that a community can grow to before its internal reputation systems basically break down so much that the community cannot get bigger than that and sustain itself. And my understanding of this is, hey, if the community's small enough, when I screw Colas over, the next day everybody knows about it, and I get cut off. I start losing access to other opportunities, other individuals, and as a result, I don't screw him over in the first place. That reputation system provides a significant amount of pressure that sculpts behavior. Above 150, let's say it's a 7,000 person community, I screw Colas over. What are the chances that the person I interact with tomorrow is going to know anything about that? Not great. And as a result, I'm totally immune. I can rob that guy today, and that girl tomorrow, and that guy the next day, and there's new victims every day. Yeah.
When was this theory established?
Dunbar, this is 20th century.
Okay, so that's probably changed a lot with the advent of social media.
No. So Dunbar wasn't dealing with technology and institutions of modern age. He was literally dealing with how our brain was structured relative to other primate groups and what village size we were able to sustain in prehistory. So without tools, without other institutional structures, the use of currency, etc., when we're relying on just the raw stuff that we came with, and not the inventions of the last 10,000 years, how big a group can we live in? But that said, that line of thinking has started to be applied to other areas. So I have a friend named Christopher Allen. Chris is most famous for co-authoring the SSL standard. Have you guys ever used HTTPS on a website?
Yeah.
Everybody's using it.
Right? Okay. So that S is for SSL. All your passwords, all your credit card information, all that is secured by SSL. He's the guy who invented that, basically. He and one other guy led the work group doing it. And he thinks really deeply about collaboration and trust. And he looked at online gaming. He looked at World of Warcraft to see how big guilds could get. Right? How big are the big guilds? It's like 60. Why? Why 60 people? Why not 150? Well, it takes a lot of energy to keep track of everybody. That's a ton of effort. When the survival of the community depends upon it, yeah, sure, you can do 150. When it's a hobby in your spare time, like, I'm not spending all day long keeping track of who's done what, who's good, who's bad, etc. What's the benefit of a bigger community? More diversity, right? You've now got somebody who doesn't just do all things metal, you've got somebody who can work only in bronze, and somebody who can take that and turn that into a sword, etc. So bigger communities have an advantage. We've had a lot of innovations. You mentioned social media. But we had a lot of innovations much earlier than that helped us scale beyond those small groups. But those innovations largely had to do with things like currency, different forms of governance. Writing, right? Writing was a major innovation that shifted the he said, she said nature and said, no, look, see, we agreed to this. Yeah. Okay.
Cool, thank you very much for the presentation. I think we'll keep coming back to that privacy question during the presentation. So we will have a team presentation.